an Apdex is like a very generalized calculation for the health of your app or like the customer experience. But what it does is it treats every single experience the same or every single type of error the same way. So I've seen these like oversimplified calculations applied to networking. So if you go, okay, uh, every single network call is exactly the same, that really drowns out what's actually important because a lot of your networking might be CDN calls or just analytics calls that you may or may not care about. And so if you fix an issue or that produces a ton of 400s on a analytics call, does it really make a difference in your user experience? Those things like the most critical networking call that you should be focusing on like in a is a purchase flow, right? Like all those calls that are happening in the purchase flow. But in terms of volume, it's small comparative to everything else that's going on in your app. And so that stuff gets drowned out. So you really do want to start with focusing on what are the most important parts of your app. Like if you have, for most apps, login. If you need to be logged in, that's extremely important. If you need to be logged in for any part of the flow, login is super important. Any e-commerce app, um, you want to make sure every piece of your purchase flow is being captured and focused on. And so what you want to do is put that in its own bucket. And you want to create your own metric. Like I care about these first party network calls, or I care about these first party network calls specifically related to the purchase flow. And I want to calculate the percentage of error there and the latency there. If you do like latency for overall page loads, I mean, there are a ton of page loads that may never matter, but just happen quite frequently. And so those are the things that you want to avoid falling victim to, because I've seen a ton of prospects come in and they say, well, our Apdex score is great, but we're constantly getting complaints about how slow our app is, and we don't know how to fix it because the Apdex score is wonderful. And then when you look at it, everything looks fine, but you haven't done the filtering. And so, what is important is to filter what is actually important and filter out the noise that's kind of obscuring what is actually most important to your team. And I think it's a matter of where people are at. Like I see some of these metrics as like you start off with the basic metrics like crash free rate, and you want it in your single pane of glass so that everyone is monitoring everything in the same place. That's like your basic stuff. Step two is you do network span forwarding because you want the full end-to-end picture. And so you want visibility into these API calls and what happens on the client side. And you want to investigate those. Um, and then step three is okay, you have some visibility and now you actually care about performance. So you're tracking what the performance of these key flows looks like. So it's not just like the API that's related to purchase. It's like the whole thing. You're doing a performance trace to capture the networking and the parsing and the rendering. And then the next step after that is that you put an SLA around it because you have timed it, you have established a baseline, and it's so key and important to your app that you put SLOs around it so that you want to know if it degrades over time, because that's how it is. So that's what I see the evolution of metrics being. Like metrics we'll start off with like very simple high level aggregates. Then you pick an API call because it's like the most concrete way of seeing something end to end. Then you see the value of that, and then you expand it a little bit. And then you go, okay, now that I've expanded and I know the timing and I know what it looks like with the errors, now let's like measure it and continue to measure it and make sure that it doesn't degrade over time. We have a customer that used an Apdex score specifically for networking. They operated in South America and they worked with small businesses. And so connectivity was poor in those areas. Like the connectivity really wasn't great, and the devices weren't great either. But people ordered through the app. And so, but their Apdex score was wonderful and great. And they looked at it and they're like, I don't understand. Like, these numbers are wonderful, and people keep on complaining about it. And their executives actually did have poor experiences on the app. So they knew that in practice, this measurement is not correct because it would commonly be a slow like page load for them. So it's not like they were the one-off situation. And so what what happened was when I actually looked at their data and I actually looked at their networking, I want to say like over 50% of their calls are like third party networking calls that were happening like very frequently. Um, they were sending data very frequently, and that completely drowned out everything else. And then if you looked at specific, even if you looked at specific networking calls, this is even more, I think, more specific to our tool. Even if you looked at specific calls, you would see that they were pretty successful. Um, but when you looked into a user timeline and an actual individual user experience, you would see some of their API calls would be called 20 times instead of once because they had so many separate teams making that same call. And what happens with like iOS, like you can maybe queue up 6 network calls and everything has to wait. So if you make 20, like that process is going to be slow because you've got to wait in line. And if you're doing that constantly on every single page load, what do you expect is happening? And on top of like having 20 times the number of network calls you're supposed to, what if every single time you pull the data, it's different? Because you're trying to get quantity, you're trying to get an inventory. And so that was like really the source of their problem. It was like a architectural problem in terms of seeing the app all together. You have so many different teams working on one single piece that they never saw what it looked like all together for an actual user experience. So, because people are looking and monitoring various pieces, you never know what the whole picture looks like. And then when you see the whole picture, it's very easy to be like, this doesn't matter. I care about this. Let's highlight this piece. But if you always look at bits and pieces and fragments of it, everything looks important. But you can never tell like the whole like magnitude of the issue until you see all of the data.